Hi, Virginia. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get in touch, but I've been full of a dense schedule here in Knoxville. It's now Saturday afternoon here, and I have had a concert last night. I have one this afternoon, rehearsal, and then a concert tonight, two more concerts tomorrow. And I hope things are going well, but I promised I would try and beam in, and I hope it's not too late, to talk about the experimental catalogue and what was going on. I got involved with experimental music in London more directly when I came back from America in the summer of 1968. I'd been in touch with Cornelius before that. I wrote to him, I think, in 1966 when I was trying to find contact with any other composer of a similar bent outside London. I was living in Sheffield at the time, and he wrote back, and with his characteristic knowledge of geography outside London, said there was Howard Skempton in Chester and Laurie Scott Baker in Newcastle, which wasn't that close to Sheffield. In fact, Laurie was probably further away from me than Cornelius was in London. Anyway, I wrote to them both, and I was in touch, and I also sent some music to Cornelius just to see if he thought what I was doing was any good. And before I went to America, where I was working with a dancer on a project where I'd written some music for him, I'd recorded this music, which is for two pianos, six hands, at the London Music Club with John. This would be at the end of 1967. And I'm not quite sure how I got in touch with John, but we recorded this music. And I remember the other pianist was Bernie Thompson. Robert Thompson was a jazz player I'd played with a lot in Sheffield, who lived in London, and played at the Playboy Club on Park Avenue, Park Lane, and we recorded this piece. And I remember it was just two pianos, six hands, and I think Bunny played the left piano, John played the right, and I played in between. So my left hand was the top end of the left hand piano, and my right hand was the bottom of the right hand piano, rather. Not very obvious way of doing it, and maybe a bit naive. But anyway, we did this piece in America, and then I came back, and I met Cornelius when I came back, and he gave me the music I'd sent him and said I was on the right track, which was nice. But I became involved and started working a lot with John Tilbury. We did a lot of duo things where I did electronics and he was playing keyboard. We played in Italy in 1969, and we did various things in the Purcell room. And I was around the Scratch and its formation, but I was never a member. But in 1969, Chris Hobbs started the experimental music catalogue, which became very important, not big scale, but I think had a really kind of unique impact. And as I understood it, the basic idea was that we wanted to disseminate a lot of the things, especially that John Tilbury had. People had written a lot of music for him. He'd acquired a lot of music from people like Terry Riley, Terry Jennings, Lamont Young, Terry Riley, and we wanted to make them available. So we had this simple principle, which was you simply photocopy them, and they're obtained from the Experimental Music Library more or less at the cost of photocopying. There was no real publishing going on in the sense of royalties or rights or anything like that. And the address to get them from was from Victor Schonfield's address in Avondale Park Gardens in Notting Hill, and Victor handled a lot of concert organisation for us. He was the one who fixed my concert at Queen Elizabeth Hall in 1972. He arranged the concert for a fantastic concert of John White and Cornelius playing John's cello and tuba machine at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, which I think more or less broke music now. I think that burst their budget completely. But Victor persisted, and he was terrific, and his address was the mailing address for the catalogue. So Chris really put things together, made a kind of a catalogue, initial catalogue, a list of works which were available at cost and so on. There's one item in there which wasn't an existing piece. Chris and I had this offer, we made this offer that we would realise a piece on request. So if someone wanted a piece from us, we'd give them this piece, I think for £25, which actually was quite a lot at that time. And this piece was called See the Whitening Harvest Languish. And if anyone ever wanted a piece, we would do that piece for them. Nobody ever asked us for it, but it was there as a hypothetical publication. And this went on for a while until around about 1972, when I think it became more complicated than it had been, and I think the work became a little bit too much. And so we tried to rationalise it a little bit. We met at Michael Nyman's house. I'd moved to Ladbroke Grove by then, 1972, and Michael was a couple of doors down from me. And we met with Chris, Cornelius, and a few others to decide the future of the EMC. And I basically Cornelius offered to take it over and to do it, but he needed a salary to do that, and there was no income to give him a salary. He saw that as a kind of job opportunity, and it simply wasn't there. But we decided there would be a three-man team. Chris would carry on, and myself and Michael Nyman would be co-editors with Chris. For ease of correspondence, we used my address, which was 208 Ladbroke Grove. I had the space to store things, and that became the mailing address for the rest of the EMC's life until it's more or less winding down in early 82 after the death of Cornelius in 81. So we also decided to sort of rationalize the printing of these things. We put things into groups of pieces, so we've reasoned that maybe someone would be more likely to get the piano piece by an unknown composer out of our gang if it was one of a compilation rather than one piece in isolation which they didn't know. So we put together a keyboard anthology. So we did several anthologies. We did a rhythmic anthology, which is basically percussion piece or systemic pieces involving rhythmic permutations. We did a verbal anthology, which involved text pieces where the notations were just texts. We also did things like we handled George Brecht's Water Yam cards, which John Gosling put together, had reprinted. We did Christian Wolf's prose pieces, Tom Phillips' pieces, and Tom did a lot of printing for some of the rather more beautiful works. The rest were done at a photocopy centre just quite near on Victoria Street near the House of Parliament, where I used to take them down and print them up, and they collate them and bind them and put them together. We used to get maybe about 50 done at a time, and then we had the catalogue printed and it was made available, and we sent it around to people, and other people got the catalogue itself. And eventually the thing had a life, and little by little we were selling things, and I get lots of letters from abroad, and it became a centre of correspondence and information. I remember in late 72, early 1973, young John Adams got in touch, and I have a very extensive correspondence with him when he's sort of finding his way, wanted to know what was going on in England, what people were up to, and what we had. And I had about a year of correspondence with him, handwritten letters, and eventually in early 74 I went over and worked with him as I was guest composer at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and we did a mixed program of things by Cornelius. We did Jesus Blood, we did Titanic, we did some of the things by members of the Portsmouth Symphonia by James Lampard and Robin Mortimer from the Majorca Orchestra, which was one of the offshoots of the Symphonia. We did some things with Chris's, of John White's, and we did play those in San Francisco and also at Mills College in Oakland. And I then went down also to San Diego, and I gave talks, and I did the same thing over in Wesleyan, where Alvin Lucier was located. I also gave some talks at Harvard while I was traveling around there. So in a way, the works of the EMC got disseminated all over the place, and people would, from time to time, who corresponded from abroad, if they were in England, they'd even come round and see what we had and talk. And a lot of people came from Australia, from Canada, and a lot of kind of friendships were developed that way, and kind of cooperation. It was through those kind of links that I guess most of the music that Michael Nyman and I were able to recommend and suggest to Brian Eno's Obscure Records came about. So I was first in touch with Harold Budd that way, and Harold sent me some material which I passed on to Brian, and that was the cause of Harold being recorded on Obscure and the sort of that kind of career with some of his work with Brian and so on. And some of the scores were printed, say, by Tom Phillips, and at that time Brian Eno was actually a kind of assistant printer to him out in Camberwell, where Tom lived. And it went on, even though the kind of musical ethos changed around us. You know, the split within the scratch with the political, non-political division and so on. But that didn't prevent us carrying on issuing the works. We published the Scratch anthology of compositions, nature study notes, the Great Learning. Those are all within our remit, which we continue to publish, even when Cornelius was kind of repudiating them and so on. And later we published some of Cornelius's subsequent songs and piano pieces, and kind of his versions of Irish traditional revolutionary songs and so on. We all did all that, and I kind of stayed, personal friendship stayed, and the kind of, that all went on in spite of the fact that we had our kind of, if you like, aesthetic differences. John Tilbury and I would go to Queen's Park Rangers every Saturday. I started watching QPR with John from 1969 onwards, when I late 68, from when I came back from America. And when I moved to Ladbroke Grove, Michael Nyman came along with us as well. So for many years, until I left London in the mid-80s, we were there on our season ticket places at QPR every Saturday. And sometimes John would bring along a kind of someone from his kind of musical world. I remember once him bringing along Harrison Birtwistle and his wife. And Birtwistle was kind of baffled, didn't really realise what was going on, and he couldn't understand our emotions. And I remember Tom Phillips' wife came once, and I remember that she laughed when Roddy Marsh missed a penalty, and I drove her home to Camberwell and didn't say a word on the whole way back. She couldn't understand us, how she'd been cut off in this way. So it stayed on like that until Core's death, and after that it just kind of fizzled out. So we gave everything from the EMC to the British Music Information Centre, and gave them permission to make copies of it for anyone who wanted it for performance or research at cost, and that's where it remained. Later I then handled some of my own publication, and later became published by Shop when I started doing sort of larger scale things and so on. But I maintained this respect for the EMC, and it was where I started and where a lot of us started, and it's part of the kind of musical world and artistic climate that informed my work completely. And I still say, if people ask me, you know, what kind of music do you write? Well, I say I come from an English experimental music background, and that's informed me, and worked with Cage and with these colleagues like Chris and John, Michael Parsons, Howard Skempton. Those are my roots, and even if the music sounds a little bit different these days, its intentions and its ethos comes from that, and I still maintain this huge respect for it. And it's great that in the more recent past, Chris and Virginia have reinvented or restarted and re-energized the EMC through their work and putting together publications and research documents and all kinds of things. So that's all available again now, and it's getting the kind of respect it deserved. It always did have respect in some circles. I remember the French music critic Daniel Coe, who died not long ago, 3 or 4 years ago. He was very active in promoting music in Paris. He was a broadcaster too. He said at one time that for him, in the post-war world, there were 3 major new musical forces that happened. One was the work of Cage, which emerged effectively after the war. The second was the American repetitive music composers, so-called minimalism. And the third was English experimental music. Those for him were the 3 important new things that came out after the war, which didn't exist before, which couldn't have been predicted before. He didn't include the kind of European avant-garde because like their seeds and their kind of ethos had come from that pre-war avant-garde period, the post-Webern and so on, where they kind of lost their way eventually. But we stayed on a kind of true and noble path, and still do. And it's great that Chris and Virginia are still doing this, and I salute them and love them dearly. But I hope this is some use, and I'm sorry I'm late. I'm a bit knackered, but never mind. Life goes on. Okay, bye-bye.